guys, it's MJ from Alta Love. How are you? The one creator, compassionate understanding. This share started out as like self as the one, and it's looking at this whole idea of separation versus oneness, the illusion of separation, how we deflect, deny, and distort inner conflict from within ourselves, and how we perpetuate that inner conflict externally outside of us. And how often people get a little bit confused about like, oh, we're all one. We are all one. We are all made up of one energy source of this consciousness, right? And this consciousness is an aspect of the one creator, and thus we are all aspects of oneness. We are all aspects of creation. We are all aspects of God. We are all aspects of consciousness. And yet we're reflections and mirrors of aspects of self which maybe we've denied, or maybe we don't want to look at, maybe we don't want to own, maybe we want to pretend it's not there. And when we're unable to look at those and feel them and heal them, we ultimately remain in patterns, systematized patterns of separation, but basically keep the wound projected onto other. So we see other as a villain, or we see other as maybe a hero, or we see other as a victim, right? And so we project those illusions onto the other, basically to not witness or feel or integrate a part of ourselves. And often how we use, and I would say almost like spiritual lingo manipulation, and we use people like, you're projecting that, or you're in denial of that. We project all this stuff out there into the world, again, to keep the illusion of what we're creating for ourselves fixed in place. And none of this is right or wrong or good or bad. It's just a kind of multi-layered aspect of how we create the worlds that we're living. And as someone who's moved through a lot of these different worlds and been very sensitive throughout, and allowed myself to be manipulated and kind of twisted up by people who lie and do all that, but that is still part of my own creation for my own soul's learning. And then how people have projected their stuff onto me is part of their creation for their learning and their reality. And whenever we try to like fix it in place, or whenever we try to like go in on other, seeking self in other is when we have the kind of big turning points in our lives. And sometimes this might look like us facing conflict. Now, conflict isn't something a lot of us necessarily enjoy facing, but in the recent ending of cycles or cycle completions, I've had to face aspects of self which were conflicted, which I didn't quite feel comfortable facing, but because part of my unconscious story was like being the hero, right? Being the hero, helping people, save the world, make the world a better place, be love and light, be a good person, be a good woman, blah. And then eventually that way of being is totally exhausting, loops us into deep suffering patterns because we're constantly looking for victims to fulfill that role. When we're ready to break free from it, we're going to peel back a lid, and it might just be that we play the role of the villain. So for me, a huge part of this ending of the cycle was for me to let my own villain out. You know, to be scary, to say no, to like rah at my old victimhood reality, at my old like, oh, you're a hero. No, you're fucking not. You're just as conflicted and shit as everyone else. So get over yourself. And then that experience perceived through the lens of love and compassion without self-judgment. So as long as I'm not sitting there in judgment of self being like, oh yeah, I'm such a bad person. Oh yeah, da-da-da. And instead saying the totality of my being, I recognize that I'm making a choice, a conscious choice to move away from these energies because they're not serving the totality of my being anymore, and I do know them well, and I do know the stories and how I've perpetuated them. But to be an authentic creator, I'll move away from energies which try to manipulate me, or move away from energies that are just too dense to shift. It's not my responsibility to shift energy for other people. That is their responsibility, and also their own soul's progression. It's so, and this is like my hands up, like, because I'm that person, like, trying to find people, and that's so arrogant of us to think that, like, oh, you need to change, or that's your problem, or da-da-da, pointing fingers around at others, claiming this, that, or the other, not realizing that it's our own energy. It's what we're putting out into the world. And what's beautiful about all this is that it is all happening in one moment. It is all happening here now in our presence, that we're, and it's subtle, you know, like I didn't even see the whole coming off of social media, like it didn't register until it registered. And we so often get trapped in our plans and trapped in our heads and trapped in our knowing, but then, and then we miss a whole bunch of stuff. We miss all this like inner like, and because we're so obsessed with like making it happen and moving forward and getting ahead, we don't realize or don't give ourselves a chance to really drop into that, because this is the creation field. This inner working is what is creating my reflections, right? So the more withdrawn I am, even though other people might be like, you're isolated or you're alone, or I'm like, I don't feel like that. I feel more supported than ever. I have healings that happen inside my own body and beingness of like beings of light all around me. And it is gorgeous. It is beautiful. And yes, I have an aspect of my personality that is introverted, but I have friends and people whom I love and who I can be around. And that wasn't something I always felt in my life. And so that's where, you know, the kind of paradox of having people make claims about us, and we're like, oh, that's not based in any kind of truth. That's just your projection of me. It's your perception of me. It's your judgment of me, rather than feeling the impact of someone's projection, thinking it's ours, right? And that's where we have to make that leap shift into the truth of our own knowing, which is profound and radical and can cause such a big wave in your reality that a whole bunch of people can kind of bounce out or bounce off, and that's where people then might kind of grasp back or try to be like, no, you know, you can't go be free, or you're wrong. And you know, because people will reflect that back to me like, yeah, that's great, but you know, we're all one. And I'm like, well, that's an interesting thing to say when you're engaged in oneness communion with other, but you deny them or you judge them because they're poor or broke or they don't have money or they're drinking alcohol or whatever. That the judgment is ultimately what keeps us separate from our own self, because the self is the only one creator. This is like the weirdest head mess with all of this stuff, is that there are veils of reality and there are veils of dimensional frequencies from where we can perceive the reality, and there's a finite creative reality within the earth dimension. But then beyond that, and we do know this intuitively in our beingness as God, as the one creator, we are the fullness. So we can imagine different realities, we can imagine different frequencies and different dimensions and all of that kind of stuff, but as long as you're still here now, you might as well tune into this vessel, this beingness, and create the kind of the highest potential you're desiring. And most of us would have had that intention. Some of us would have had an intention just to work through some karma. Some of us would have had an intention to maybe know what freedom is. Some of us would have had an intention to know what community is. Some of us would have had an intention to know what love is on this planet, right? In this body. I don't think I've known love in this body as many times as I've been on this planet. I've been alone, and that's something about my own knowing of my own soul vessel, right? Is like every time I incarnated here, I've been a bit like in my own reality, and that is beautiful and fine and wonderful. But this intentional life was something quite different, in union with other. How does the sovereign being, the freedom being, how does she integrate into this reality of conformity, access the freedom, and then from within freedom access love in union, love in unity with other? And that's in business, in friendship, in romance, in all of it, right? And so that deepening connection to the intuition is ultimately leading us to next level of our own potential and intentional creation. Because we are the only one creator, but we get kind of slammed in. Now, as the one creator, you have to admit the fact that you're creating the darkness too. That we are the ones creating the polarities of our own reality. And until we own and integrate the fullness of what we can create, the potential of what we can create, because it wouldn't be there unless we were an aspect of that creation, then again, we remain victims to a big, bad, scary world until we integrate and own that fullness, that polarity, right? Because we can all be the villain, and we can all be the saint, and we can all be the blah, 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 blah. And my personal journey experience in integrity, which is like the best feeling, really, authenticity and integrity, because that means I'm unconditional with myself. It doesn't matter if I go out and get drunk and do pills and ecstasy. It doesn't matter if I'm living squeaky clean and like, I'm a well-being guru. It literally doesn't matter, because I am the whole one. So then if I can accept myself as a shitty, bitchy, whatever, as much as I can accept myself as some kind of savior. However, what I realize is that I don't actually desire either one polarity. I just desire the self as one. And that is ultimately what's pioneering this next level, where I'm like, ooh, what is on offer? This reintegration, this re-emergence into my own world, right? And how I want to feel into that world. And this is where I'm like represent. I'm like going back into these early childhood phases of like being a total nerdy bookworm, and there I can feel it. There's like this part of me, I'm like, oh my god. And I've met people who are like heading back into academia, and I'm like, oh my god, is that world opening up to me? Do I want to go and study and write more down and try to prove stuff to different people? I don't know. I just say there's infinite realities, and like there's infinite realities. I am going delirium, but I want to thank you guys for showing up today and joining me, and for choosing to be the one, because you choosing to be the one means that other people could choose to be the one, which means more people can break free from thinking they're slaves to a limited reality, and then they can empower themselves to be more than that, and ideally be free and be in love and be in joy, so that more and more of us are actually creating a world from that point of attraction. We can create this world that's more harmonious, more technologically advanced, more sustainable, or completely sustainable, in unity with the being that is Earth, because we're one with her too. I think that's it, you guys. I gotta shoot. I'm off to Central London today to see some yoga client for transformation. You know when you get those moments where like the sound of your own voice is pissing you off? That just happened to me. So I'm gonna go. I love you guys so much, and I'm so thankful for you. And one of my last posts about going off social, I really appreciate your guys' feedback, because it's the YouTube crew who were I don't know, this community of YouTube is kind of where it's at for me right now, and I really appreciate your guys' like support and like the reflections. One of you wrote me an email about like, I love the ramblings, and I'm like, oh thanks, because again, it's like the old MJ or the old Molly had just people being like, shut up, like that's not useful, like da 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 da, and I'm like, oh okay, I kind of enjoy it, but that's okay, I'll try to be more like other teachers and da da da, but I don't care, I don't want to have a label. I'm just like a person who's moving around through her life wanting to be more joyful, wanting other people to be joyful, and having this huge awakening of realizing like I can't make people joyful. There's nothing I can do or say I can just only continue to live the freedom and the love that I have access to, and permission other people to do the same. But no more am I gonna kind of bend and twist myself to let people suck the life force out of me unknowingly, and then keep trying, you know, to help them. It's like, oh my gosh, people are smart and supported in our reality. Like, why do we buy into all these stories? I don't know. Part of our own growth, I guess. I love you guys. Have an awesome day. Peace out. Yo.